Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is that you're watching this event. Hello, my name is Dendra Best. I'm the Executive Director for Wastewater Education, and we're so happy that you've chosen to join us today for what will be the kickoff event for our Earth Month 2019 activities. Our organization does two things. It educates and provides online and distance learning training for anyone associated with the wastewater profession, but we also do a lot of public education and public outreach because it seems quite alarming to us that we've been in business now for getting on for 17 years and people still have a really hard time understanding or appreciating the role of sanitation. So at this point, I need to read our legal disclaimer for our purposes. As we said, we are a public outreach and a consulting organization. We're dedicated to the advocacy for the protection of water as a vital human and ecological asset through the implementation and management of affordable, appropriate wastewater systems. We are a national and international education service provider, and we also host and facilitate events for other entities. We are independent, we're impartial, we assist individuals and communities to discover the financial and environmental advantages of implementing sustainable, integrated water infrastructures, because quite simply, as our motto says, water is water, not waste. So the disclaimer is that we host and we make publicly available these events, and they should not be construed as an endorsement or paid advertising. We do accept and encourage sponsorships and underwriting, and this enables these education events to be provided at little or no charge. Please visit our website and you can learn about our recent activities and all of our transparency documents. We're also committed to making these events available for the hearing and the sight or other disability or impaired, or those for whom English is not their primary language. This event will be recorded and posted to YouTube, at which point you can enable closed captioning or translation services there. At this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day. Let me move this over here. As you will see, the delightful Oliver Grievson, my good friend, and he's also our current board chair. You can view his long and distinguished resume via the LinkedIn contact, which is listed there to the left of the screen. We'll also post that to the notes on the YouTube pod. So today we are celebrating the 200th birthday of a man who can truly be listed among the giants of the engineering and the public health legacy, Sir Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette was a pioneer in the construction of municipal city-scale sanitation systems, and his achievement, considering the machinery and the methods of that time, is truly astounding. But the legacy of Bazalgette has had unintended consequences, which we will explore a bit later in Oliver's presentation, but also throughout the upcoming Earth Month events. At this point, Oliver, I would like to hand this off to you. Let me move over to our screen here. Let me pause my video and hand off to you. Let's wait a minute while the presentation gets loaded. Just to let everyone know, I'm going to minimize the chat window here a little too. I'm going to mute my microphone. Oliver, take it away.
Thank you, Dendra, and thank you all for joining us today, whether you're live on the event or watching later on video. What do we think of when we think of the sewer? I always call the water industry one of the great hidden industries. We open our taps and hopefully clean water comes out, we flush the toilet, and it suddenly disappears. It's something that's basically a phenomenon that we'll discuss today. But But because before that, the sewage system didn't really exist, and we're in quite a different sort of world. So when we look at the sewer, what is the sewer? If I was to look up the definition of a sewer in a dictionary, what would it say? Well, it's a means of us as a human race to transfer our bodily waste, it sounds a bit crude, but it's true, to another place for treatment. When you go back 100, 150, 200 years, there were sewage farms. Before that, in the picture, we see quite a common sight in those days of people emptying chamber pots out of the window. They'd wake up in the morning, they'd empty the chamber pot, and you hear the phrases from Europe, agua ba, water below, and it was when somebody threw the contents of the chamber pot out of the window into the street, which became an open sewer, and it was basically to warn the people below that there was a stream of shit coming at them if they didn't get out of the way. The streets basically washed down into the rivers, and there was gross pollution. At those days, you also had rudimentary, what we call short or long drops. When you went to the toilet, you went out into the garden, and it was basically a cesspit. All the liquid drained away, all the solids had to be taken out. But if you didn't take them out quite regularly, you had disease. But you also had water pollution. You had pollution of the drinking water supply, which of course was in the aquifers underneath our towns and cities. So when we look at the sewer, it's not only a methodology of transferring our bodily functions away, but it's a piece of public health engineering. So if we go back a few hundred years, we go back to London. I'll take you on a journey to London, and it was the 1850s. And if you imagine the time, we didn't have cars, we had horses and carriages in the streets. We had open sewers, people throwing their chamber pots out, as I've just said. The horses, if you go to some of the European cities now, the horses are a bit of a tourist attraction, but even the horses defecating in the streets is still a problem to this day. And they basically end up putting what's basically a big nappy on a horse to stop pollution in the streets. So back in the 1850s London, you had almost a toxic environment. And this all came to a head in something called the Great Stink. You see a caricature from a political magazine at the time, Death on the River. And it was because the streets of London and the rivers were basically an open sewer. It became a scandal. When this scandal affected the Houses of Parliament, and the air within the House of Parliament was virtually toxic, it stopped the Houses of Parliament doing its job. And in came a famous engineer called Sir Joseph Bazalgette. But at the time, when you look at London, it wasn't only Bazalgette. There was a chap called Dr. John Snow. And he was one of the key people that basically established public health engineering in London. He discovered in the 1860s there was the Soho area of London, there was a load of deaths. A lot of people were dying in quite a small, unique area. In the picture you can see there were some scattered deaths. Within a month, there was a whole cluster of deaths. John Snow mapped all these deaths and actually pinpointed the problem down to a waterborne disease. And by taking the handle off the water pump in the local area, he became very unpopular because people had to go somewhere else for their drinking water, but he also managed to stop an outbreak of cholera, something that wasn't discovered in terms of the actual bacterium until 1891. And I believe, Dendra, you've got a video?
In 19th century London, nothing brought more fear or panic than the yellow flag signaling a cholera epidemic. And the outbreak that hit in 1854 was one of the worst.
Good morning.
John Snow, a London physician, knows he can't help the dying. But he is determined to help the living by figuring out how victims catch cholera in the first place. Today we know that cholera is caused by a germ, a bacteria in this case, that is spread in human waste. But back then, the prevailing theory held that cholera was carried in a cloud of bad air called a miasma.
Miasma. It can't be miasma.
If it's carried in the air, it should attack the lungs. But we know it attacks the gut. It must be something else.
I know what you're going to say. It's in the water. You've been saying the same thing for years.
If it's in the air, we should all have cholera by now.
You could say exactly the same thing for your water.
Maybe. But I just feel I'm right.
Then prove it, John. Prove it.
Snow sets out to do just that with the only tools he has: logic and statistics.
My name is John Snow. I need to know how long your husband was ill.
He visits the homes of victims in a neighborhood called Soho
Did he eat any old fish or meat?
and tries to find anything that sets them apart from the healthy. He then begins to plot his data on a map.
And where'd you get your water from?
The Broad Street pump.
And where does your family get its water?
What Snow was doing, what Snow really originated,
Thank you.
is the basic premises of an epidemiologist. He was looking at the contours and shape of an epidemic.
His careful detective work reveals a compelling pattern. Virtually all Soho cholera victims got their water from a single well on Broad Street. Municipal authorities surprised the Soho neighborhood by removing the handle from the Broad Street pump.
Get the handle off, man.
It's a victory for the persistent John Snow and the power of statistics.
And once the pump was disabled, the cases fell like a skyrocket that was done. It was just over.
I'll take that.
Later, city officials discovered that water from the Broad Street well was contaminated with cholera germs from a leaking cesspool. What John Snow accomplished is now called surveillance and response, and it remains our best defense for combating any disease outbreak.
Tracking the outbreak of disease, tracing it to its source, understanding the causal connections, these are still the basic tenets of public health.
So we can see how important that the work of Dr. Snow was in finding an outbreak associated with the waterborne disease, which was crucial in that time. But around about the same time, you had Bazalgette, and Bazalgette was basically commissioned by the British government, literally because of the great stink, because of the miasma, because of the whole problem with sewage acids and rotting sewage and everything else. He was commissioned in the 1860s to design a sewer system for London. And when you think of what this sewer system did, it was basically just transferring the sewer, converting the city from an open sewer, transporting it properly into the Thames, but a lower down from where most people were living. So it wasn't per se making the environmental situation better, but it was making things better for the people of London. Now, when you look at the remarkable feat of what he did, it's not been matched to this day. He designed 120 miles of sewer underneath London, and you've got a map roughly down towards the bottom of the slide there that crossed London. The sewer was built in triple line brick, so 3 layers of brick, and the sewer was enormous. And you can look at, but equally underneath the Houses of Parliament themselves, you also had a sewage injection system. And you can look at what was said at the time in the Houses of Parliament. And this was said by a member of Parliament sitting in the Parliament. I do not rise to take part in the discussion upon the amendment before the committee, but to call attention to the abominable atmosphere in which we are sitting. It seems to me that the air of this House is not only disagreeable, but that we are really sitting here at the risk of our lives. Unless something can be done, and that immediately to remedy the evil, we ought, out of respect for ourselves and respect for our wives and children, to report progress and adjourn the House until such time as we can have an atmosphere in which it is proper for us to sit. So, sewage injectors, which are still working to this day, were put underneath the Houses of Parliament, and Bazalgette sewers were also installed across London. Now, when we see sewers, this is probably what we think of. This is beautiful triple line brick sewers. All it actually did was transfer that pollution further downstream, but it was done in proper Victorian engineering skill. When you're looking at the sewer there, you're looking at 2 different types of sewer: an egg-shaped sewer, which is basically egg-shaped to promote grit and transfer any debris, and to collect that debris at the bottom of the sewer, and an epic round sewer. That is quite amazing. And rivers. That's what we imagine when we imagine sewers. An absolute river and a massive piece of stunning Victorian engineering. He also built the pumping stations, and probably the most famous pumping stations is Crossness, and I think we should be able to play a video. That is a link to a YouTube video of Crossness pumping station. Now, one of the amazing things about Crossness pumping station is the absolute beauty of it. The other amazing piece is the engineering skill. They have 2 beam engines in the pumping station, which were used to pump sewage, and they are absolutely stunning. I do encourage you to watch the YouTube video, because you will see engineering, the Victorian engineering, at its very best. All of this comes into early pollution legislation. You again see in the picture Bazalgette giving old Father Thames his business card. But in terms of legislation and clean water legislation, it was around about this time that we started thinking about legislating for public health. It was the very first parts of public health engineering. So, in 1876, you had the River Pollution Prevention Act. It was a good idea, but as we didn't really know how to treat sewage, it basically was a meaningless piece of legislation. It was till much later, in the 1880s, you had sewage farms. Basically, sewage just poured over fields, some addition which kind of did something. 1890s, the first percolating filters in Salford in Manchester. But it wasn't until 1914 and the First World War where you had Arden and Lockett with the first activated sludge plant, again in Manchester. And this was the first massive design of sewage treatment across the UK. And this is where it really started in terms of the earlier legislation probably led to this part, this engineering happening. It was also around that time that the Royal Commission set up a review, and it was 1898, and it took 17 years and 10 reports. They did reports on trade waste, and you'll often hear the 2030 standard. And it was actually a recommendation, it wasn't legislation, it was a recommendation by the Royal Commission that has become legislation and is in use really to a certain extent to this day. And what are we talking about? Over 100 years later. And it's all based upon a 1:8 dilution, or a minimum of 1:8 dilution in the river environment. It was still treatment, basically some treatment in the wastewater treatment works, but it was also treatment based on the pollution principle of dilute and disperse. Not ideal. So things did get better, but it took a good while. It was in 1936. The local council started talking about the Public Health Act that enabled traders and trade industrial discharges. 1951 with the River Pollution Prevention and Pollution Act, and 1961 with the Public Health Act. 1960s for the Mogden formula, which is the formula that we use, that's still used to this day, based out of Mogden in London, which is just by the rugby football stadium in Twickenham, which was designed to work out charges to industrial discharges to sewer. 61, the River Prevention and Pollution Act was extended for all existing discharges. 1974, the Control of Pollution Act, which started to bring together the first principles of holistic pollution, so air, water, land, and noise. And again, this is where the EU started getting involved, and we start getting things like the Urban Wastewater Treatment, 1995, the Environment Act, the Environmental Protection Act, which again brings the legislation into the holistic environment. 1998 with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and that's still going to this day. 2007, so we're only talking 12 years ago, the environmental permitting regulations, although that was dealt with under the Control of Pollution Act before that. And it is only until relatively recent times have we started talking about river basin asset management plans and the Water Framework Directive. And this is what's gone into limiting nutrient discharges to rivers. This is all related to the wastewater system. As a industry, we've thought of the sewer and the wastewater treatment as something different. Reality, they're part of the same system. So we have got to think of it from a holistic point of view. We have also got to think about the impact on the environment. But what does this all mean? What does this all mean to us? When I first started my studies in environmental science, they said, well, environmental science is really about people and the effect that we have on people. And this is one of the most remarkable facts I love about the wastewater industry. The British Medical Journal in 2007 said the development of sanitation has been the greatest medical advance in the last 166 years. And the reason they said that was modern sanitation by those public health engineers like John Snow, like Bazalgette, like Arden, like Lockett, has extended the human lifespan by 20 years, which I think is quite amazing. there are still places in this world where you have open sewers. You don't have that benefit of modern sanitation. Medical science has done amazing things, but it is modern sanitation. It's preventing the miasma, preventing the environment that was complained about by the members of Parliament and was complained about the general people in London, that really has had the most impact on our lives. So that's the history. But what does it look like now? Well, when we think of sewers, I think of films like Ghostbusters and the river of slime going through the sewers of New York. We all think about the massive Bazalgette sewers that people can walk through. And it's not the only case. They're a massive mixture of different shapes, different sizes. You saw the egg-shaped sewer in the earlier picture. Basically, there to allow grit and all the debris to accumulate at the bottom of the sewer, which makes it, when there's a flush of things through the sewer, allows a greater velocity in that period to flush out the sewer. We all know the larger sewers, and actually some companies are starting to put drones down, but those are the gravity sewers. There are also pipes. There's also the pressurized pump system, which is also part of the sewer. It can be gravity. This is on the picture on the left is actually the inlets of a treatment works, and that's a gravity inlet into a sewage treatment works. But it's also pumped. Your local area could have a collection point, could well have a pumping station. So reality, it's not just the Bazalgette sewers, it's not just there are a variety of sizes, a variety of things, and the importance of that is especially different today. Sewers can be combined. In the UK they usually are. So rainwater, stormwater comes down. They could be separate. I think most modern housing blocks nowadays are separating off the water. They're separating off the flat foul water. But also, certainly in modern developments, you see something like you see on the right, sustainable urban drainage systems. We've got to consider those also part of the sewer because they have a massive impact. They are part of the wastewater system. And like anything, they need maintenance. But what's common to all sewers is there is a vast network. No matter the size, be they 4-inch 100mm or be they the Bazalgette sewers of London. You can see in the picture there, which is a picture pinched from Bazalgette, you are getting a very, very large network of sewers underneath London. Put that out into the whole of the UK, you've got hundreds of thousands of miles of sewers under the whole of the UK. You put that into other areas, other countries that are less densely populated in the UK, then yes, you'll have urban conglomerations of urban systems like the London system. There'll be a similar system under New York. There'll be a similar system under most major cities. But they are big, they are long, very, very long. The sewers of the past had problems, but so they do now as well. And these are the modern problems that we have. We've seen the problems most recently about fats, oils and greases. We've seen the problems of wet wipes. We've seen the problems of sanitary liners. On the BBC right now is one of the Blue Planet programmes, and earlier this afternoon I was watching that, and they were doing the anatomy of a fatberg. And when you take out the fats, it's all to do with sewer misuse. In the UK, the WRC, which is a research, has brought together a standard which says this type of wipe is safe to flush, fine to flush. In general, what's said in the UK, there's 3 things that should go down the sewer. Pee, urine, poo, feces and paper. And the reason for that is we have a modern problem with the sewer environment. Water UK estimation 2018, £100 million, and probably a lot more, was the cost of sewer misuse. And as a result, the whole water industry in the UK have worked to introduce this standard by the WRC, which says this wet wipe is fine to flush. Because the problem is that £100 million is affecting the service that will eventually happen to the customer. There's only a limited amount of money, and if that money gets spent clearing sewers because of sewer misuse, then it's not being spent on growth, it's not being spent on other areas, it's not being spent on improving the wider environment. But we move into a sewer of the future, and it's not just the sewage environment. We've got to start thinking about the sewer as a system. The sewage system, the storm system, and the wastewater treatment, and think about the river environment as a whole. Because at the end of the day, what is the wastewater industry about? It's about improving, we can see from Bazalgette, it's about improving the life for people. It's about improving the natural environment. It's about minimizing our impact, because otherwise that impact, if we don't improve it, will come back and harm ourselves. It is one part of a big system. And the customer, if you look at that system, what's it contain? It contains the customer. Be it on the clean water side, be it on the wastewater side. The customer is at the centre of the wastewater system. If the customer stopped taking water, the customer stopped depositing into the sewer, then the wastewater industry wouldn't exist. It contains the collection network, the pipe work that conveys to the wastewater treatment works in storm conditions. Yes, on combined systems, overflows. An emergency system can overflow. And at the end is the treatment works. It is a system of systems. And this phrase, you may well have heard of Water 4.0, you may well have heard of Industry 4.0, you may well have heard of the smart water and wastewater industry. When you look at the system approach, there's input from the customer. There's input from the environment, i.e. rain, and there's input from industrial customers. That can go into the pressure sewer, that can go into the gravity sewer. The pressure sewer can burst. It doesn't very often, but it can happen. A pumping station can overflow to the environment. On the gravity sewer, you get infiltration into the network, and you get combined storm overflows when the gravity system can't cope. As long as you convey that to the treatment works, you've got that whole box on the right is all about the wastewater treatment works. It's the preliminary treatment, the screening, the grit removal, the primary treatment to remove gross solids. The primary solids, when we start talking about the circular economy, the water industry's got very good at garnering energy from primary sludge, which is the main energy source. We're getting better at storm storage, at storm handling, and storm handling and management is a very active discussion at the minute. We've got very good at secondary biological treatment. It's come a long way from those fields of sewage with very rudimentary treatment. And when you take the activated sludge plant of Arden and Lockett, you're getting down to some very, very low amounts. But actually, there are even more demands. the levels of nutrients coming out of wastewater treatment works are very, very low, but when you still look at the environmental impact, when you still look at the level of nutrients within rivers, the pressure is to take them even lower. In some ways, that's a scary prospect, but at the end of the day, that's what's a holistic approach is what's needed for the environment. What you don't get within the sewer environment, because of difficulty, is there doesn't tend to be a lot of monitoring. Yes, on the pump network, there'll be a lot of monitoring around sewage pumping stations. On the gravity network, there is some monitoring, potentially monitoring of flow, some areas potentially monitoring of levels. But there's not a lot of monitoring before it enters the wastewater treatment works. And this is probably one of the barriers for us to control the wastewater network even better. And why would we want to control it? Well, if we limit the discharges in wet weather to the discharges to the environment, and we can predict the amount of rainfall coming into the network, and have some foresight of what to do, which will enable us as a country, us as an industry, to manage the sewer environment much better, then there's the potential to improve that riverine environment, to take the pressure off the wastewater treatment works, where we're exceedingly using more and more intensive techniques. And those intensive techniques, yes, will improve the river environment, but is there an impact from the amount of energy that's used on the air environment, as we're using huge, vast amounts of electricity? I think the rough statistic in the UK is, I think, 7% of all of the, no, it's 3% of all of the energy in the UK is used in wastewater treatment, which is a staggering amount. A lot of the water companies are doing quite a lot to offset that by power generation on the wastewater treatment works. But what if we can, yes, funnel it all down, and yes, take a step back and look at the impact of the wastewater industry, including the collection network, to balance off ensuring that all the wastewater gets to the treatment works for treatment where possible, and so we can balance off the energy needs by balancing off the regulatory demands. That is the potential for the future, but in that we need to manage the wastewater network, the collection network, much better. And that's where the smart water industry can come in. Sounds impossible? Well, it's been done. Southern Water, I've shamelessly pinched this from a project that was done down in Southern Water and their smart wastewater treatment works. This is the Eastney catchment, which is actually in Ireland. It holds the military base of the naval base of Portsmouth, and the basic history of the project was there was extreme rain over several periods, which caused the whole area to flood, including the naval base. This was a risk that they didn't want to ever repeat because it had a very large impact. And so they looked at installing a smart wastewater network within the island of Eastney, which is in Southern Water's area. This was basically the pumping station for the area, which controlled all the dry weather flow. Basically, when flows went over dry weather, they had to be pumped onto the mainland, and when flows came back, they had to be pumped back. This area got flooded. Actual amazing thing, but Southern Water did an amazing project. They telemetered the area, they put rain gauges, they put levels, and basically they put an operational model system to allow the operator a forecast of what was going to happen. And that way, the huge pumps, which controlled the area, could be controlled on a pumping schedule. It's a blend of an automated system and a system based upon manual control because of confidence and because of the importance of the area. But it was a truly revolutionary project developed down for Southern Water. So can we have a smart wastewater network? Absolutely. It absolutely exists, but it takes that monitoring to allow that control to happen. But it doesn't have to be complicated. Some of it's all about using the data. And here's an example from Yorkshire Water. And they looked at the blockage timeline. Their problem was sewer blockages were becoming a problem, and there were at-risk areas. They knew that they weren't quite able to predict what was happening. And so what they did was they took a look at the data and took a look at what was happening. And it's all down to what happens in the sewer is normal flows, normal dry weather. There's not enough strength in the sewer to flush it out completely. So debris accumulates. Debris accumulates at pinch points. And if there's a really heavy rainstorm, that debris will get flushed to the wastewater treatment works. If you've got an intermediate rainstorm, then it can actually just accumulate in the sewer and make things worse. So what Yorkshire Water did was analyse the data and find out where they had to do proactive jetting of the sewer to help the sewer work correctly. And in that, they got amazing results. So it doesn't have to be complex, but it's looking at how the collection network, the wastewater collection network, behaves. And it was a very interesting case study that they did, and I think this is about 4 or 5 years ago now. But there are lots of benefits. There was some work done down at the University of Exeter under a PhD student called Fan Ling Meng and under Professor David Butler. And it's revolutionary work, but they looked at what was in effect controlling the wastewater network, controlling the wastewater treatment works based upon process-based control. And what they basically found, and there was Fan Ling presented at a workshop that I was running, was basically you could get a better environmental quality if you managed, for less money, if you managed the wastewater network and the wastewater treatment works together as a whole system. And it was some brilliant work, but it was all about the automated control, smart control of the wastewater system. So there you had some figures based upon their control scenario: 50% less energy costs, 90% lower pollution discharge load, which is amazing, and 80% operational stability. And what you get on activated sludge plants when you've got an operational stability is less stressed bacteria, and that's important because it actually lowers the gaseous emissions from the activated sludge plant, mainly nitrous oxide, N2O, which is a massive greenhouse gas. And the greenhouse gases emissions from activated sludge plants have been studied for about the past 5 to 10 years. And if you stress an activated sludge plant, it will emit more greenhouse gases. So not only are you getting an aquatic benefit, but you're also getting a benefit to the air environment as well. Things have come a very, very long way since Bazalgette. and in some ways they haven't. We had Bazalgette's sewers of the 1870s, and you can see that in the two pictures on the left-hand side. The most modern project is the Thames Tideway, and when you look at the Thames Tideway compared to Bazalgette sewers, you're actually seeing something that's remarkably similar in a way, and we're doing this, 150 years later. Yes, the sewers look nice and neat and tidy, but that's actually in construction. That's the Lee Valley. It's a picture I pinched from the Lee Valley in construction. But at the end of the day, the sewer environment has a very, very important job, and that's to keep us healthy and to keep the aquatic environment clean. Thank you very much.
Oliver, thank you so much. Let's move on to our closing screen here. And, just to pick up on a couple of things that Oliver was talking about, the holistic approach to managing water resources. And that really is the theme of our Earth Month events. It's about rethinking, recycling, and reusing. Because it isn't just dealing with a wastewater infrastructure in isolation. We are facing climate and water shortage and water stresses that Bazalgette could never have imagined. And at the close of this, we're going to show a little clip from a series that was put on by PBS. It's the Sinking Cities series. And I wanted to put the link into the chat window here. It is possible that people outside of the US that are watching this video may not be able to see it, but clips of it are available on YouTube, and when we post that to the YouTube channel, I will find out for you. And the reason we put this in here is that the Thames barrier, when it was constructed, was designed to prevent the flooding of London. But nobody could have imagined that rising sea level would accelerate at the pace that it has. It was designed to not need to be retrofitted or worked on for a very, very long period of time, but London is now at the point that they are closing the Thames flood barrier more often. And they're having, as we said, as Oliver pointed out, the monitoring function here is to open it when the tide is going out, but close it when it's coming in, so that hopefully they can keep pace and it will not overtop the Thames flood barrier. The issue, on the other hand, is the diminishing supply of drinking water. And there was a BBC article that I'm going to post the link for here. Because the other part of this is that when London, like most of the major cities in the world, is built on a coastal axis, it was built as a port of entry. And so the water that is coming in is saline. And the issue of dealing with a drinking water supply that's been inundated by salt water, if you are in the US, I do encourage you to watch the PBS Sinking Cities series so that you can see how places like Miami and Baton Rouge and some of the other major coastal cities are having to deal with rising sea level. Whether or not you believe that climate change is human-made or not, you can't deny the fact that cities are seeing the real evidence of rising sea level. The other side of this, of course, is the certain areas of the country at the moment are experiencing extreme floods. I'm thinking particularly out in Nebraska and South Dakota and Iowa, which is inundating drinking water and wastewater systems. So the concept that Oliver talked about managing water systems as a system in a holistic way is becoming rapidly much more important. We have a few closing comments here. If you would like to have advance notice of our future events, by all means, please go to our website, wastewatereducation.org, and sign up for our e-newsletter. If you've enjoyed this event, please consider becoming either a sponsor or a promoter for some of our events. We also, of course, gratefully accept donations. A few closing comments before we play the Sinking Cities video here. We'd like to thank, obviously, everybody who's watching this recording, and to consider the legacy of Bazalgette. Some have painted him as an absolute hero. I would hazard to guess that both me and Oliver classify him as a hero, but also there are those who look at him as a villain. That probably is seriously judgmental and far too simple a characterization. That the sewers were an answer to an issue at the time. They're still an answer to an issue of this time, but as we've seen with all of the technology and the engineering advances that Oliver has talked about, we are advancing and we are changing, we are adapting, and we are developing systems to meet a very different changing world. And if there's one thing our organization has firmly established as our public education outreach this year, it's looking to the future. Yes, indeed, to quote an old saying, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. But at this and every time in history, those who are in the now, including us, believe that we are the giants. As a species, we must move forward. We recognize those possibilities, and we meet the challenges with fresh eyes every single day. That's the nature of human beings. We are explorers and innovators, and stagnation is not an option. We can't keep on doing things the same way all the time. Bazalgette took a very brave leap into at that point, pretty much uncharted future. He was not without his critics of those days, but today's engineers, sanitarians, water reeves, professionals, we are seriously walking in his footsteps. And for that, we say thank you, Sir Joseph Bazalgette, and happy birthday. And at this point, Oliver, I'm going to mute my microphone and we'll show the video, and then we will close out the event for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
So we're on Nestor Avenue now, where we believe that the Houndsdon gutter, a lost watercourse, flows to my left. If you put a river in a pipe or a channel, it's got a finite capacity, and when that capacity is reached, then that's when you start to get flooding coming out of things like manholes, flooding into properties and gardens and roads, as opposed to the natural watercourses which could flood out onto floodplains, which in many cases are still there. So if we could daylight some of these watercourses in the areas where they can be allowed to safely flood, then that reduces the flood risk to the built-up area.
Daylighting means opening the river back up to its natural state, giving the water more room to flow. But since they've long been covered over, these rivers have disappeared from modern maps.
Okay, so the map has led us to the open section of the watercourse that's to my left, and there should be a pipe or a tunnel linking that to the next visible open section of watercourse. So we're just going to go down into the river now and walk the river and look for the existence of the tunnel.
Harding discovers that his software correctly identified the existence of a buried section of river.
This conduit that was built when the road was built, when the houses were built, this was just a way of putting in a nice straight line that was out of people's way. And it's typical of thousands of kilometres of ordinary watercourses across London.
Most of the people who live and work in these shops and cafes have no idea a river once ran through their community, and may soon be flowing again.
There's no reason why they couldn't be restored to a more natural river corridor. Now that we know it's here, we can understand that any upstream flood risk that's caused by the throttling effect of this tunnel, and we can then look for opportunities to allow the river to spread out into our safe open areas.
So far, over 11 miles of lost rivers in London have been daylighted. One of the best examples uses landscaping with earth bunds or embankments here at the Firs Farms wetlands in Enfield in North London.
We identified that using Firs Farm as a flood storage area, we could protect quite a significant number of people living downstream. We realised that instead of building a concrete wall, we could build a natural earth bund as a defence. And to generate the spoil that we needed to build that bund, we could carve out a channel, and that channel has now become the restored river.
Though the wetland is about 12 miles from the centre of London, the project is already having an impact, reducing the amount of rainwater flowing into the Thames system.
And we realised that using wetland planting, we could mitigate urban pollution. You can actually clean that water by passing it through a filter bed system. We've ended up with a combined wetland and flood storage area here. And by combining those two things, you get multiple benefits. You've got the permanent habitat, which is always here, the wetlands and the plants and the wildlife and so on. You've got an area that local residents can come and visit and enjoy on a day-to-day basis, but you've also got a functional landscape which actually stores tens of thousands of cubic metres of water during intense rainfall and protects people living downstream.
Harding sees this kind of organic approach to flood prevention as a necessary complement to large infrastructure like the barrier.
The scale of hard engineering that's needed to start to address flood risk through climate change now is becoming unfeasible. You know, we can't go for the big tunnel solutions forever. We need to start sort of rolling back some of the urbanisation and sort of managing flood risk in a more natural way, like this project does.
So once again, thank you for attending. Thank you for watching this recording. There is a link that we can share to the PBS Learning video version of this, which I will put into the YouTube account. At this point, everyone, we'd like to say thank you so much for attending. Do sign up for our e-newsletter, and we will certainly alert you for the upcoming events during Earth Month 2019. Thank you again, Oliver, for being our presenter today, and goodbye, everybody.